Hi everyone, Dan Gunner from Insane Forensics. Welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday, where every week we try to give something to help your threat hunting and security program. And today what we're going to dive into is how to use user agents to save the world. So user agents, a very common thing you see in HTTP traffic and Zeek logs. And today what we're going to show is how you can use user agent to find malicious activity like scanning, and then how to find unknown or unpredictable user activity with user agents. So let's hop right in. So hopping in, quick overview of user agents for those that might only be familiar in passing. On the left, we have examples here of what user agents look like. On the right, we have some stuff from the RFC that we're going to talk through on format. But to break it down, user agents contain information about the host originating the request. And the function of these in the HTTP protocol is to help browsers understand how to properly serve data to the client, right? What are the client's limitations? What can and can't the client do? And then how can basically the server help? You know, if it's an older browser, the server might decide to send a different version of the page to the other side. User agents by the RFC aren't actually designed to be intrusive, although there is somewhat of a nature, right? Because you can fingerprint or you can tell a lot about someone using the user agent, and that's the benefit to us as security people. So again, the format with this is one or more product identifiers followed by 0 or more comments. If you look there on the left, your product identifier, Mozilla, you have / and then the product version. So Mozilla 5.0 in that case is the product. And then when you have the comment, right, you have that platform, RV, Gecko version, and other information specific to the browser. Same with Mozilla there, right? You can actually see on that second line down there, Windows NT, right? So we begin to see, okay, this is on Windows potentially. If you go to the bottom right, you see Apple WebKit, you see Chrome, you see Safari. That's probably a Mac, right? It could be Windows because they do have cross-platform versions of those, but again, it's likely a Mac. Important things on here, by the RFC, the sender is only supposed to send what's necessary for the request. It's frowned upon to give a bunch of information, even though sometimes some browsers will, depending on the plugins you have. You know, there's a limit to how much the RFC recommends that a developer actually sends down the user agent to, right? You don't want to send the version for every subcomponent. And finally, there shouldn't be needlessly fine-grained information in there, and limit third parties. So where user agents become helpful, we're going to look at 3 examples of scanners that show very well in user agents, and these are things you can immediately look for. So starting with Hydra. So Hydra is a password cracking tool. Hydra supports a huge number of protocols. You can see the list there in the middle of the page, and I'm not going to talk through those, but Hydra is great for brute forcing a really big variety of protocols. When we look for the Hydra user agent, we can see Hydra's in that comment field. So by default, you're going to have Mozilla 4.0 Hydra. What's interesting here, right, on the last slide, we saw Mozilla 5.0 and then the comment. And so again, when we're looking at user agents specific for a hunt or specific for detection, we might look at the product version and say, okay, I'm seeing Mozilla. Okay, I'm seeing 4.0 when normally I see 5.0 on my network. That might be something you build a detection or you build a threat hunt to look for. Hey, let me look for user versions that are previous to the user version I generally see on my network, right? It's a newness, it's an outlier. Looking for outliers on version is something you absolutely can do with Hydra. Beyond that, right, then looking at the comment field and saying, hey, Hydra is in the comment field, right? Hey, I'm missing all of also the other comments that a Mozilla-based browser typically sends, right? That might be something else in addition to just looking for Hydra in there. But again, just by the user agent, for the Hydra scans that use HTTP user agents, there's, as you can see, multiple things we can look for in here. Nikto, same deal. This is a web server vulnerability scanner. It can look at a whole bunch of different stuff and a whole mess of different web servers. With Hydra, or with Nikto actually, you have different user agents here. So again, you have the Mozilla and you have the version. Again, you have a 4.75 in some, you have a 5 in others. And again, when you go into comments, you have Nikto, and then the version of Nikto is actually in the comment field. What's cool with Nikto and why we chose this for an example too, is that by default, they also show what evasions are there and what test is being run. So when you're running Nikto 2, you can give it evasions, you can give it tests on the command line, the tests are the modules. And what we can see here is actually down to the granularity of, okay, which specific test is actually being run against my server and what evasions are they using. Now, an important thing to note here is that you can provide a custom user agent for a lot of these tools, and Nikto is the same deal. So an attacker can come in and say, hey, don't use the default user agent, use this one instead, and you won't have this. But again, if an attacker doesn't know that, or they're just running the tool, you're going to see this user agent down with this granular set of data. So again, in here, it's really cool. And why we chose this was being able to see both the evasions and the actual test being run. That test, and in the past, what we've done is gone into the Nikto GitHub or the Git repo and look for the specific test. And from there, you can map and say, okay, this is the specific script that's being run against my server. Nmap, this is the last scan we'll look at for a specific tool. Then we'll talk about what you can do if you don't know the tool or you want to branch beyond just known tools. So again, Nmap's a network discovery and security auditing tool for those that don't know. Again, when you look at the user agent or the default user agent of this, your product and product version, again, is Mozilla and 5.0. So if you're just looking at product and product version, you're not going to see a huge difference here. But again, when you get into the comment field, we begin to see Nmap scripting engine and the link to the Nmap book in there. Again, this is what's sent by default. Some different modules might use different user agents, but what is in Nmap's code by default is to use this user agent. So again, just looking at user agents, looking at comments, looking for very static things like Nmap being in there or differences, you can actually quickly find Nmap with user agent detection. So we talked about 3 examples of known tools. What happens if we don't know what tool's being used, or what happens if they do change a given user agent, right? We aren't always going to know the specific tool that's being used against us. So what we can do is establish kind of a baseline of, what are the typical user agents by host, right? The product version. What is the standard for those 2 fields for a given host, right? And even going down into the comments, right? You can even get that user agent down to a specific application. Okay, hey, when a user is using Chrome on OS X on my network, it's generally this user agent. When they're using Firefox, it's generally this user agent. What you're establishing with that baseline is the norm of what you expect to see. And what that'll help you do is look for deviations from that norm. That helps both on detection and on the threat hunting side. What you then do is you monitor for those new user agents and changes to those user agents. Now, a thing to note is as software is updated, you might have a natural change in those user agents. But again, you should still see that software update and it should still kind of align to that. But also it's helpful for finding malicious things. Where this is also helpful is an attacker's probably not going to know your specific user agent. So they can go online and they can find lists of common user agents and environments, but just because a user agent is common doesn't mean it's common in your environment. And that's where it's important to look for, hey, let me look for what my common user agents are and maybe look for an attacker that's just going out online and saying, okay, well, this one has high prevalence everywhere else. They're guessing that it's actually prevalent to your environment. So again, big advantage here in looking for kind of user agent outliers is the attacker's not going to always know what's normal for your environment. You also want to monitor for unexpected usage of those common user agents, right? Or changes to them, or common tools, right? That's super helpful for looking for that. So where can we look for these user agents, right? Where are places to pull user agents out of? We can do this out of captured network traffic. So if you're using Wireshark, T-Shark, if you're using the Python wrappings, PyShark's a popular tool for that. We can pull the user agent out, throw it in something like a Jupyter notebook, put it in a script to kind of rack and stack and count them. But captured network traffic is one great place. Zeek or Corelight IDS logs, right? If you go into the HTTP log in Zeek, you can pull user agents out. This is a great way. Maybe you pull those user agents out into something like Elasticsearch and use Elasticsearch to pivot through or visualize what the prevalence and distributions of those user agents are over time. Doing it over time is interesting because we've actually in the past been able to see when red team engagement or pen test engagements start solely by seeing when user agents arrive on the network and when they depart and knowing, hey, yeah, there was a pen test or red team engagement going on at this time. Server and host logs, sometimes server logs will actually store the user agents of the client. Sometimes you have to turn up granularity to get this, while other servers it's actually built in and enabled by default. Firewall logs, sometimes you'll get it in there. IDS logs also. Suricata and Snort, oftentimes these IDSs will have rules looking for that Nmap, a user agent, looking for the NICTO, looking for other known bad user agents. Those are good because sometimes they will actually log the whole user agent in there. So again, thanks for tuning in. Today we talked about user agents. We talked about 3 known scanning tools and how you can use user agent analysis to find them. And then we talked about how you can find tools and techniques that don't use predictable or known user agents. Thanks for tuning in this week. We hope to see you back next week.